So Gloomhaven Digital have just released a new patch which adds 2 new difficulty modes into the game, one easier mode and one harder mode. And I thought this was maybe a good opportunity to look at those 2 modes, but also to have a little chat about what makes Gloomhaven so hard and why is Gloomhaven a difficult game. I see a lot of brand new people who maybe haven't played the tabletop game, who have come to this for the first time and really struggle right from the get-go, even on some of the easier levels of difficulty, to really grasp the game, maybe because you're fundamentally not understanding the game at a certain level, or perhaps getting really bad luck potentially. There are lots of things that could be going wrong. It's very hard sometimes to pinpoint exactly what might be going wrong in someone's save or why someone's having a really hard time. But I thought this was a good opportunity to maybe talk about it. So it's going to be a little bit of a brief thinking head type video today, just talking about difficulty in Gloomhaven really. So first off, let's take a look at the actual modes that they've added. They've added a deadly mode to the game. So if you're coming from the tabletop version, you'll be pretty familiar with this. It's just an added variant. If you wanted to play at +3, you could do in the board game. There's nothing to stop you from doing it. So it's nice that it's an official mode that's supported here. It's an official difficulty that's supported. It's really good now that we don't have to download a mod. Before we were having to get this difficulty level by modding. So now we don't have to do that. That's really nice, just being able to swap between the modes and also convert our current saves onto this level of difficulty if we want to. We can just increase that in the settings. So really, really like that. Great job by the devs for just implementing that for us people who really like it. They've also added though a friendly mode, which is a level below easy. So easy to begin with, lowered all of the monsters traps 1 level lower than the scenario level. Now in Gloomhaven, there are 7 levels of monsters. Monsters have 7 levels of stats. There can't be any less than 0 and there can't be any greater than 7. So when you start at level 1 with your characters, you will be starting as your baseline, as your party level will be 1. So this would lower that down to 0. But the devs in Digital couldn't, or maybe they didn't want to or shouldn't, some people might argue, add other stats in for below 0. And also the game is hard coded around these 7 levels of difficulty. So if the game wants to make it easier in terms of what monsters can do in terms of damage, movement and all that stuff, they can't really do that. There's no room for the game to change that. Now they've added the friendly level of difficulty. Now what this does is this is actually quite similar to what was available in Guildmaster. In fact, I think it's the same as what was available in Guildmaster before, which is where you're actually going to start the scenario with 3 blesses in your deck. Takes away some of that bad RNG feeling maybe that you might be getting, because a lot of players do sometimes feel like, well, I just seem to be getting bad RNG. I flip all of my bad cards. Still got to be careful of that model, but yeah, it will make things a bit easier for you. Healthy as well has been added, which means that heroes have 50% more health. Now, why is this a important change? Well, when you're playing on lower level anyway, so you're playing on -1, the enemies generally don't attack for a lot, especially when you're just starting out and the monsters you're going to be facing, you're going to be attacked for like 2. What does this really equate to? Well, obviously on a big character like the Brute, it could be substantially more health. 50% more is quite a bit. Whereas if you're playing on someone like a Scoundrel, it's only an additional 3 health to that character. So 1 more hit that you can take before maybe you might have to burn a card, or perhaps you will die because of the damage that you're going to take. It's an interesting change, I think. But really, is this going to solve the issues that people might have? Gloomhaven is a very interesting game and a great game because it is actually more of a Euro style game rather than it is, say, a American style dungeon crawl type dice chucking game. What do I mean by a Euro game? If you don't know, if you're not a board gamer or you've not heard the term before, Euro games generally are games that have low levels of luck, or at least reduced levels of luck. They generally tend to have a kind of economy, an action economy in them, in which you have to spend actions to do things, and it's always the same kind of cost to do so every single round, and you need to spend your resources really effectively in order to min-max the amount of efficiency that you can get out of what it is you're doing. You know, famous Euro games might include stuff like Brass Birmingham, Terraforming Mars has levels of this. There are lots of famous games that have this, lots of games that I own. They generally tend to be my favorite types of games, and they have different levels of randomness within them. But generally speaking, they're usually low levels of randomness, and the players having a lot more control over their own sort of destinies and their abilities. And it's about managing your resources effectively. Now in Gloomhaven, this is obviously in the setting of a dungeon crawl game, and a lot of people see the game and think, wow, it's like an RPG, it's like a tabletop RPG game, or it's like a traditional dungeon crawling game, like a lot of other games that people are really used to playing. Well, That's not strictly true, because the randomness is definitely still there. So there's still some random there. That's what often makes the game quite interesting. But they take that down a little bit and actually kind of throw this kind of tactical game at you, really, which is all about managing this economy of actions really, really well. That's what makes the game hard. It's not often the random nature of it. It's the fact that a lot of people maybe come to the game thinking that, well, I can just run in and I can hit something and I can do this like you would do in any normal RPG game, but that is not the case in Gloomhaven. Really, this game is a lot more about optimizing the resources, your resources being your cards, your health, your items, things that you pick up over time. That is your resources to use. Your initiative is a resource, being able to make sure you have the right initiatives when you want them, and carefully planning the use of those resources over the rounds. It's not necessarily about just running in and hitting something every single time and then just ignoring what the enemies are doing or not really caring what they are doing. It's often about seeing what they're doing, reacting to that, doing what you're trying to do best, planning for that, learning about the enemies, and over time you'll improve and these things will start to come naturally to you, right? You'll start to sort of see the pattern in the different enemies and what they do, and know when's a good time to push forward, when's a good time to retreat, and when's a good time to long rest, short rest. All of those kinds of things start to come. Difficulty that Gloomhaven has, I don't think, is really down to some of these things that they've actually implemented into the game. So having this additional 50% health, is that actually going to make it easier for players? I don't honestly think it really will, because I think a lot of players really struggle with the concept of burning cards more than they do anything else. A lot of players just end up getting themselves into sticky situations, or they see a very powerful card and they immediately want to play it. So they move in, and they play the big powerful card, they burn it, maybe they do kill something, maybe they do a nice big attack or something. Perhaps it's underwhelming because some of the RNG might be poor and they might not draw their ×2s, or they might not get that luck with some of their draws. And then after that point, the enemy starts chipping away at you, just chipping away at you, chipping away at you. Then you just kind of end up dying very, very quickly because you have to burn cards to damage, or you burn cards too quickly. Like if you see my other video about burning cards, maybe you burn cards so quickly that you end up struggling because you end up running out of cards by the end of the third room, by the end of the second room. You might end up with no cards in hand. I've also seen some people suggest that maybe they should just make it so that burn cards aren't actually burned. So whenever you would burn a card, actually you get to keep it and you can continue on. So this kind of avoids players from running out of stamina potentially. But this would just fundamentally, I think, create bad habits in players and really just ruin the whole balance of the game. You may as well just play a completely different game at that point. I think it takes away a lot of the fun and the uniqueness of Gloomhaven, and really that risk reward of what these big attacks and what these big burn abilities really do. Gloomhaven often likes to dangle all these really interesting options at you. It gives you like an absolute toy box full of cards at the beginning of every scenario and says, here are your tools for this scenario. How are you going to complete this scenario? And I think if you come at the game from a much more traditional RPG viewpoint, you will often come through looking at the game thinking, oh, well, I'm going to use my big things, because that's what those games traditionally kind of run on, or they teach you. Now, if you play on the lower levels of difficulty, I think you can get away with a lot of that stuff. But I think it's about maybe setting your expectations a little bit here about what the game really is, because the game is not burn a card around the game. It's really not. It's a much more tactical, deep decision-making game than that. And I think a lot of people maybe come into it just thinking that it's going to be a bit of a cakewalk on friendly or easy, when it's not, because it's very easy to make bad decisions that might not even inherently look bad at the time you do them. They might actually look pretty reasonable. But once you don't know the value of your actions, if you're not paying attention to the value of your actions or the value of the things sometimes that the enemies are doing, it's very, very easy to put yourself into bad situations. And in Gloomhaven, bad situations generally tend to compound on each other. You know, once you kind of make one bad decision, it puts you into a bad spot, which maybe then means that the next round goes poorly for you as well. Perhaps you get out of sync with your cards. Perhaps you play a card a little bit too early, and then that means that the next round you don't have that card to play, or you have to burn it to damage, which then means you can't play it in the future round when you're really hoping to. There's a lot of moving pieces in this puzzle, which is why I love it, because it's a really puzzly game in that respect. You know, trying to find out how to put this puzzle together and how to make these different things work for you to come out with the win at the end is really what I really, really enjoy. But certainly if you just run into it with an expectation of just being able to, you know, be a big dumb barbarian and just hit things as much as possible, I think you're going to suffer. And I don't even think that friendly difficulty here is necessarily going to really solve that problem for you. Now, you could get really lucky, draw those blesses every single time and kill stuff really quickly, and it's not a problem. But also, you could just end up still having bad RNG and still struggling a little bit. I really wanted to talk about, like, is Gloomhaven too difficult? I don't think it's too difficult. I think that the approach that many players take is slightly incorrect, or it's maybe the expectation of what you think the game is really not what the game is. And I see a lot of people compare Gloomhaven to like Dungeons and Dragons, or they compare it to other dungeon crawl type games. It's really not like some of these games. Those games can be won and lost on a die roll, or many die rolls. And Gloomhaven can be won or lost on the flip of a card sometimes, but it's more often than not, especially on lower levels of difficulty, you should have ample opportunity and time to be able to win scenarios handily if you take into consideration things like stamina, your enemy positioning or what it is they can do, learn a little bit about the enemies, about their initiatives and why, you know, ending your turn next to an enemy and then long resting is probably a bad idea. So there are certain things that you really need to get into your head, and that you can't just go into this game sort of gung-ho and expect to maybe win the first time. And is Gloomhaven too hard? I don't think so. I just think that a lot of people maybe approach the game in the wrong kind of mindset, or maybe they're looking for a different kind of experience, and that game does not give you that. It is much more of a Euro kind of action economy style game, or a tactical puzzle game, than it is a kind of traditional role-playing game in many respects. If you want to play it as more of a RPG game, I would encourage you to play it on lower levels of difficulty, because at that point in time, once you do at least get good with the fundamentals in the game, you can then kind of comfortably push on and maybe do any party that you want, be able to play anything that you want, and really kind of still have relatively good success and win most of your scenarios, as long as you have a good grasp of the fundamentals, moving out of damage, not burning cards too early, and just doing things, you know, that do make sense for trying to win the game. I didn't really want to do like a really long video about this topic, but I've just seen this new difficulty be released, and I really wanted to talk about it because there's been a lot of talk, especially I've seen a lot of posts from people who've been playing digital and they're brand new and maybe they're struggling a lot. And I just think that maybe it's an expectation that players have to be able to beat games on easy difficulties comfortably, and that they think that this game is a role-playing game when it is not really a role-playing game. Certainly has role-playing elements, and certainly you can get into the swing of it and you can role-play your character. Absolutely you can do. But there is a fundamental kind of mechanical game system underpinning this game at its core. And if you just ignore that and try and play however zany you want to play, then, well, don't be surprised if you might not have great success. It really does ask you to think a bit about it as what you're doing. All right, so just a short video today, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I just wanted to talk about this subject a little bit. Let me know down in the comments your experience with the difficulty in Gloomhaven. If you've come from the tabletop version, did you find, you know, the standard difficulty in the game, in the tabletop version, okay? Did you struggle a lot? I know a lot of people did initially. Also, like, if you're brand new to the digital version, like, do you think this is enough if you're struggling? I'd be really interested to know. I really want to know, like, what experienced players think about this, and then what brand new players may think about, you know, difficulty. Like, was it what you expected? Is it harder than you expected? Is it easier than you expected? Is it just a completely different game than what you expected? That would be really interesting to know. I fell in love with the game because it's a deeply tactical game, not necessarily because of the role-playing elements, although they definitely help brighten the game up and make it interesting and fun to talk about a lot more. You know, it's probably the most thematic Euro game ever made, potentially, and I love it for that. But fundamentally, for me, it still is kind of like a Euro game, and yeah, I like that because that means that I can kind of solve it and I can puzzle it out, and I really enjoyed that element of the game. You know the drill, guys. If you did enjoy the video, please do like and subscribe. Also, come over to twitch.tv/mandatoryquest, where I stream every Monday, Wednesday, and Sunday if you've got any questions you'd like to ask me live. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching. I will catch you in the next video. Bye.
I think so. Yeah.
Oh, that's the blessing from
Yeah.
That's the blessing from.
Isaac, at this point, can we get your approval to add an additional attack modifier deck for allies in the digital version?